It was the kind of summer heat that didn't ask permission, just wrapped itself around you like a wet cloth, and stayed there. Late afternoon light poured over the Missouri backroads in long, syrupy streaks, settling into the cracks of the two-lane highway and glinting off faded roadside signs. For miles, there was nothing but cornfields, radio static, and the slow hum of tires on asphalt. Camilla Brooks was used to this stretch of country. She'd driven it dozens of times over the years, official trips, investigations, long days, chasing shadows through red state silence. But today, it wasn't about any of that. Today was supposed to be a quiet return home. She wasn't in a suit or on a call. No briefcase, no badge in hand. Just jeans, a windbreaker, sunglasses, and exhaustion. The kind that lived in your shoulders and behind your eyes. She spotted the station just before a bend in the road, old, run-down, paint blistered under the sun. 2 pumps, 1 crooked soda machine. The kind of place that felt forgotten on purpose. She pulled in, slow gravel crunching beneath the tires, rolled to a stop beside the second pump, cut the engine, and stepped out into the heat. The breeze smelled faintly of pine needles, old oil, and hot rubber. A cicada buzzed somewhere in the trees behind the lot. The air was still, heavy. Nothing stirred. Camilla opened the gas cap, swiped her card. The machine beeped a sluggish protest, then came to life. She gripped the pump handle, one hand resting casually on her hip as the fuel began to flow. And that steps when she heard it. Gravel. Crunching again, but not hers this time. A vehicle, tires slow rolling over the lot's edge. Deliberate. She didn't stern, not right away. But she felt it, the shift in the air. The temperature behind her spine. A Benton County Sheriff's cruiser pulled in, its white body streaked with dust, windows down just enough to let the radio spill out low and garbled. The door creaked open with theatrical slowness. A man stepped out, heavy boots. Thick arms, tan uniform faded at the seams. Buzz cut, the kind of lawman whose authority was stitched into every step. Camilla didn't flinch. She kept her hand on the pump, calm and still, her body a study in practiced neutrality. The deputy's voice came before his shadow. "You lost, Mustom?" Slow, drawled like he was dragging it through grit. Camilla turned, careful and measured, hands visible. Her sunglasses hid the flicker of calculation behind her eyes. "Just getting gas," she said. Her voice was calm. He looked her over like a riddle that offended him. Eyes sliding down her jeans, over the SUV, back to her face. "License?" She nodded, no hesitation. Just the slow reach into her jacket pocket, nothing fast. Nothing to give him a reason. She handed it over. He stared at it, longer than necessary. Said her name aloud, like it didn't set fit right in his mouth. Camilla Brooks. Then something changed. Not in the world, but in him. He stepped closer, the air between them folding in tighter. "What are you really doing in Benton?" Camilla kept her voice even. "Getting gas." Like I said. But he didn't back off. He stepped in until the shine of his badge was inches from her shoulder. His breath smelled like old coffee and tobacco. "You got an attitude," he said. "I don't sit like that." And just like that, without warning, he shoved her. A rough push, shoulder to chest, slamming her back into the side of the SUV. Camilla staggered, caught herself. One hand on the open door, the other curling into gravel. Her breath pulled tight, but she didn't yell. "Hey," she said, sharp but controlled. "That sip's not necessary." He didn't respond. He just leaned into her vehicle, opened the passenger door, and started tearing through the glove box. Sunglasses. Receipts. Old gum, tossed like trash. Camilla's hands stayed loose at her sides, knuckles pale with restraint. "Registration's in the top folder," she said. Still calm, still steady. He found it, crumpled it, then turned back with a look of disgust that went deeper than paperwork. And then he did it. He raised his boot and kicked. Hard, right into her shin. She dropped. No scream. Just breath punched out of her body and knees slicing gravel. The fuel nozzle clanged behind her. The world tilted. The deputy didn't stay. He just turned. Walked off like he'd tossed out garbage. Climbed into his cruiser, door slamming. Camila stayed down for one heartbeat longer. Then two. Then she pushed herself up, slow, deliberate. Blood at her knee, dust on her palms, but her spine straight as steel. She didn't look at him. She looked at the teenage boy across the lot, phone in hand, eyes wide, camera still rolling. And then she looked back at the ground. Her ID lay in the dirt. She picked it up, brushed it off. The incident was over. But something far bigger had just begun. The sting in Camila's leg had started to fade, but the memory of the kick hadn't. It lodged itself behind her ribs, somewhere between her breath and her pride. The kind of hurt that didn't bleed out, it settled in. Familiar, in a way that made her stomach tighten. She leaned against the SUV's doorframe, fingers gently brushing flecks of gravel from her palm. Her knee throbbed in waves beneath the denim, warm and stiff, but she didn't touch it again. Pain was not the thing to focus on right now. Instead, she let her eyes drift. Across the parking lot, the gas station squatted like a relic from another time. The paint peeled from the eaves in long curls. An old Coke sign hung crooked in the window, buzzing faintly. There was no one else in sight, just the teenager still standing near the crates, his phone gripped tight, his eyes full of too much. He'd seen it. He'd recorded it, and now he stood there looking like he wasn't sure whether to run or cry or apologize for witnessing something he never should have had to. Camila didn't wave him off. She didn't tell him to stop filming. She just nodded once. Slow, controlled, permission, not command. And then, for the first time since she hit the ground, she let herself breathe deep. The air was thick with heat, gasoline, and something sour. But beneath it, under the noise of her thoughts and the pump's final sputter, there was something quieter. A memory, not a clear picture, more like a feeling, old and worn and heavy as lead. She'd been here before. Not Benton, not this exact lot, but here, this moment, this dynamic, this slow, familiar choreography between assumption and authority. At 17, it had been a mall parking lot in Tulsa. She'd been waiting for her cousin, leaned against the hood of a borrowed car when a security guard circled. No questions, no greetings. Just suspicion draped in a badge and the assumption that she didn't belong. That was the first time she'd been asked what she was doing this far out. At 25, it was an airport terminal in Baton Rouge. The field badge hadn't been visible, but the skin was. TSA had pulled her into a side room, not because of alarms or behavior, just a random search that turned into a delay that almost cost her a human trafficking bust she'd been chasing for weeks. She'd filed a complaint after that one. Nothing came of it. It never did. And now, here she was. 52 years old, chief of the Midwestern Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a title that got her invited to cabinet briefings and classified war room calls, a title that came with weight, with risk, with power, but not, apparently, with protection. Because in this town, on this lot, wearing jeans and sunglasses, she wasn't Camila Brooks, federal powerhouse. She was just a black woman behind the wheel of a black SUV with out-of-state plates. That's all he saw. That's all he needed. She closed her eyes briefly. Not to escape, but to center. There had been times, many times, when she could have used that badge like a shield. Flashed it like a sword. Stopped the doubt before it formed, but she never did. Not because she was trying to make a point, because she needed to know. She needed to see how far someone like Deputy Riker would go when he thought no one could stop him. That's what the job had taught her, more than anything else. People will show you who they are when they think you have no power. And what he showed her today, that wasn't new. That wasn't surprising. It was just confirmation. Camilla looked down at her hands again. There was a tremor there, small, barely visible. Not from fear, from restraint. Because inside her, past the professional calm and the velvet voice, was a fire, a quiet one. Smoldering, not raging. The kind of fire that waits, the kind that calculates. This wasn't Step going to end here. Not at this pump, not with her bleeding in the dirt while Riker laughed his way back to patrol. No, he didn't know it yet, but this was the moment his career cracked. Because he thought he'd just kicked another civilian. Another woman who'd walk away bruised and silent. But Camilla Brooks didn't set bruise easy. And she never stayed silent. The phone in her pocket buzzed once, then twice. She pulled it out slowly, screen lighting up with a name that only popped up when things got serious. Olson, Director of Ops. Secure line. She answered with one breath, her voice iron. This is Brooks. Cam. And just like that, the weight shifted. The silence broke, and the reckoning began. It should have ended there. She'd shown her license, spoken with calm, given him every chance to walk away with his dignity intact. Camilla stood still, beside the open door of her SUV, the pump handle hissing its final drops behind her. Her hands were empty, her tone unthreatening, her posture neutral. But Kyle Riker wasn't interested in neutrality. He wasn't here to verify an ID or enforce any real law. He was here for something else. Control. The kind of control that demands submission in silence. The kind that doesn't settle until the person across from you knows exactly who holds the power. And in that moment, he decided she needed to be reminded. "You got an attitude, Miss Brooks," he said, stepping in again, so close she could smell the stale chew on his breath. "I don't like that." Then he moved. It wasn't a warning shove this time. There was no bureaucratic gray zone in what followed, no policy he could hide behind. It was blunt. It was intentional. It was violence, pure and simple. He raised his boot and kicked her. Hard, right into the front of her shin. The sound of it, flesh meeting steel-toed leather, cracked through the parking lot like the snap of a branch under pressure. A sound too sharp, too final. Camilla went down. Not in slow motion, not with cinematic grace, just fast. Gravity did its job, and the gravel met her knees with unforgiving intent. The pain shot through her like an electric current, raw and immediate. Her palm hit the ground first, breaking the fall, but her right knee caught the worst of it, slamming hard enough to tear fabric and skin in one motion. Blood bloomed through the rip in her jeans. Sharp, dark, and angry. The gas pump clunked behind her. A hollow, indifferent sound. The handle slipped from the tank and swung sideways, still hissing out fumes that cut through the summer air. Deputy Riker stood over her, hands on his hips, smirk curling just slightly. "That's Seps where you belong," he muttered. Eyes narrow. "Stay down." Then he turned, like he'd just closed a fridge door. Like nothing had happened. Like she wasn't a person at all. Camilla blinked against the sting of dust and pain, breath caught in her throat. For a second, she didn't move. Not because she couldn't, but because she knew what this moment was. It was the line. The one people like her were expected not to cross. Not out of fear, but out of survival. It was the line between standing and staying silent. Between swallowing the insult and answering it. She could hear her own blood in her ears. A rush of heat and memory. Old echoes of "be careful" and "stay calm" and "just let it go." But she didn't stay down. She pressed one palm into the gravel, ignoring the sting, ignoring the ache in her leg, and lifted herself, inch by steady inch, until she was upright again, knees shaking. Jeans torn, chest rising and falling with breath. she made soundless. Not a word, not a curse, just presence. Across the lot, the teenage boy with the phone hadn't moved, his face pale, his arms locked in that fragile hold of someone recording something they didn't yet know would change everything. He watched her, and she watched him. Then slowly she bent at the waist, not because she had to, but because it was time. She picked up her license from where it had fallen, wiped the dust from it with the back of her sleeve, and straightened again. Riker's cruiser rolled out of the lot behind her. Its tires spat one last spray of gravel in her direction. He didn't look back, but he made a mistake. Because Camilla Brooks wasn't just another woman in a parking lot. She was the storm he just summoned. And the wind was already turning. The gravel clung to her palms like it didn't want to let go. Camilla stood slowly. No theatrics, no fury, just deliberate motion. Each breath came sharp and shallow, but she didn't show it. Her shin throbbed, her knee screamed, the torn denim clinging to the blood underneath. But she stood, because that's what you do when they expect you to stay down. The sheriff's cruiser had already pulled away, tail lights flickering like afterthoughts, in the haze of heat rising from the lot. The engine's growl was gone now, but its echo hung in the air like the scent of gunpowder after a shot fired. She didn't yell after him, didn't curse, didn't threaten. She just stood there, alone, beneath the humming sign of a station too old to care and a sun too hot to show mercy. The moment could have split in two, right then, between action and reaction, between fury and discipline. But Camilla chose a third path. One harder to walk and quieter to witness. Dignity. Not the polished kind found in awards or speeches. The kind forged in silence, carried in the spine when everything around you says collapse. The kind that refuses to shrink just to make someone else feel tall. Her hands trembled, but not with fear, with restraint. Her face held nothing but calm, not numbness, awareness. The kind that sees every detail and chooses to wait. Across the lot, the boy with the phone hadn't moved. His arm was still raised, the lens pointed. His breath held like a string that might snap if anyone spoke too loud. He looked at her like he didn't understand what he was seeing. Not yet, but he would. Camilla bent, slowly, knees stiff, body resisting the motion, and picked up her ID. The plastic was dusty, a corner scuffed. She brushed it off with the edge of her sleeve, tucking it back into her pocket with the care of someone reclaiming more than a name. The nozzle still dangled from her car, forgotten. Fuel had stopped pumping, but the smell lingered. Her SUV stood open like a witness. The door hung wide. The seat was empty. She didn't climb in. Not yet. She turned to the boy. Met his eyes. He flinched, like maybe she'd scold him, maybe she'd tell him to go. But she didn't Send it, she said, voice low, steady. He blinked. To who? She looked past him, past the gas station, past the road, to everyone. And that was it. No fireworks. No fist raised to the sky. Just the quiet choice to stand in the aftermath and hold space for what came next. The stillness wasn't weakness. It was readiness. Because storms don't always start with thunder. Sometimes they begin with silence. The pain in her knee pulsed steady now. Rhythmic, grounding. Camilla stood beside the SUV with the air thick around her, heat rising from the asphalt in shimmers, the smell of fuel still lingering like a threat. Her badge was still hidden. Her silence had not been weakness. But now, the moment had shifted. Her phone buzzed once inside her jacket. She pulled it out slowly, screen bright, despite the glare. The caller ID was a name that rarely surfaced except when protocol shattered. Olson Dierops, Shear. She didn't hesitate. Brooks. Cam, she answered. The voice on the other end came clipped and controlled, but layered with something else beneath urgency. Are you all right? Olson asked. We got a geo-alert from body cam footage flagged in Benton. Something happened. Camila's gaze drifted toward the edge of the lot. Dust still settled where the cruiser had disappeared. "Deputy assaulted me," she said. Flat. Clear. Unprovoked. It's Seps on a civilian Seps phone. Mine too. I want a full pull on Deputy Kyle Riker, complaints, partners, Iowa filings, body cam records, Sheriff Seps chain of command too. There was a pause, less than a beat. But in that space, she knew the machinery had begun turning. "We stir on it," Olson said. "Standing orders? Nothing gets scrubbed, nothing gets delayed. I want his file by the time I reach Jefferson." Another pause. A deeper one. "You sure you want to go this route?" Camila didn't blink. "I was kicked in broad daylight by a uniformed officer, because he thought I was no one. And that was the moment. Not the shove, not even the boot. This the call, the quiet decision to turn the tide." "Understood," Olson said. "You still have everything by the hour. Do you need transport?" "No," she said, watching the teen across the lot still clutching his phone like a live wire. "I have everything I need." She hung up. The air around her felt different now. Denser, like the current had shifted beneath her feet. The calm was still there, but sharpened. It had an edge now. Camila turned to the boy, who hadn't moved. She nodded once, and he stepped forward, cautious, but brave. "You okay?" he asked, voice barely more than a breath. She nodded. "Send the video," she said. "To who?" She looked down the road, where dust still lingered, like a scar. "Everyone." Because this wasn't going to be buried in back channels. It wasn't going to get reduced to an internal review or sanitized in a quiet press release. Camila had made the call. And now? Now the system would have to answer. The video hit the internet like a spark in dry brush. It didn't start with fanfare, just a teenager's shaky hand, a gas station lot soaked in summer heat, and a boot, one raised high, one coming down, one black woman falling hard into gravel and silence. The caption was simple. "This happened today. Missouri. Sheriff's deputy. No badge. No reason. Just hate." Within 10 minutes, it had 20 shares. By 30, it had 1,000. By the time Camila's SUV pulled into a diner 2 towns over, blood crusting at her knee, silence taut inside the cabin, the video had already started to metastasize. It bounced from TikTok to Reddit to Twitter, where threads bloomed like weeds. "Does anyone know who she is?" She didn't even fight back. "Look how calm." This is what they mean by power unchecked. But the tide didn't turn until someone did know who she was. A former field agent. Then a journalist. Then a retired DOJ investigator. Each one recognizing the woman in the sunglasses as not just a passerby, not just a victim, but Camila Brooks, the chief of the FBI's Midwestern Division. That changed everything. Suddenly, the video wasn't just brutal, it was bureaucratically damning. Because the question now was instead, why did he kick her? It was, how didn't he know? And that question had sharp edges, cutting both toward the deputy and deeper into the sheriff's office that let him roam unchecked. Camila sat in the back booth of the diner, untouched slice of pie in front of her, coffee gone cold. Her burner phone buzzed on the table, again and again. Marcus had texted. "Riker Seps trending. You stir viral. File Seps coming." She tapped open a secure folder as her knee throbbed beneath the table. 6 years. 4 closed complaints. All buried. 1 IA investigator. 1 dismissive sheriff. All connected. Each document on the screen added a brick to the wall Camila had already begun building, not around herself, but around the truth. To trap it, to hold it in place so no one could wriggle out from under it again. She opened a second tab. Sheriff Linda Calkins. 3-term incumbent. No internal disciplinary actions on record. Too clean. Camila scrolled faster, cross-referenced complaints, saw names repeat like a melody that only got darker with each refrain. One judge, one local attorney, one forensic clerk, all the same players rotating through the same broken game. The pattern wasn't just there. It was deliberate, and it had gone unnoticed because the system wasn't designed to catch itself. It was designed to protect itself. By the time Camila stood from the booth and limped toward the SUV, her inbox had erupted with press inquiries, encrypted bureau pings, and a flagged message from a DOJ compliance unit. Urgent, please confirm involvement. She didn't respond. Not yet. She drove instead to a motel off the county line, where anonymity was cheap and questions weren't asked. There, she laid out every piece on the bedspread. Figuratively, digitally, carefully. A map began to form. Sheriff Calkins was the gatekeeper. Deputy Riker was the blunt instrument. The II officer? The shield. But it was the funding records Marcus sent next that cracked the whole thing wide open. Construction contracts, surveillance upgrades, campaign donors who doubled as vendors. Camila stared at the spreadsheet until it blurred, then leaned back. This wasn't about one kick anymore. It was a lattice of wrought, quiet, interlinked, and self-sustaining. She tapped a secure call. Marcus answered. You seeing this? Every line. They thought no one would ever draw the connections. Start pulling every case dismissed under Calkins in the last 10 years. That steps a mountain. Then get a shovel. And just like that, the digging began. At 2:12 a.m., an anonymous source emailed a folder to a national journalist. Attached the original video, the personnel files, the misconduct patterns, and a scanned internal memo where Riker had been recommended for temporary leave 6 months ago, overruled by Calkins. No commentary, just facts. And facts, once visible, don't go back in the dark. By sunrise, the journalist had published a story titled, Benton County Sips's Shadow, the Kick That Pulled the Thread. It was front page by 9 a.m. By noon, protesters stood outside the sheriff's office. By 2 p.m., the Department of Justice announced a federal review. And Camila? She sat in her motel room, knee wrapped in a towel, fingers still typing, building something stronger than outrage. Evidence. Because while others burned hot with anger, she worked cool with precision. The system had cracked. Now it was time to pull it apart, piece by piece, name by name. And this time, everyone was watching. The courthouse steps weren't made for walking in pain. Each one throbbed through Camila's bandaged knee like a drumbeat of memory. Boot, gravel, breath. But she didn't slow. She moved with a kind of precision that didn't ask permission. The kind that warned the world, I am not here to be handled. I am here to end this. Cameras lined the railings like vultures, their lenses clicking in frantic rhythms. Microphones craned above the crowd, all pointed toward the podium that had been dragged out that morning. It was chipped at the corners, hastily wired, but in the center of it stood a place where truth could finally be spoken aloud. Camila took her place behind it. No press team, no lawyer flanking her, just her voice, her name. My name, she began, is Camila Brooks. I am the chief of the FBI SEP's Midwestern Division. I have served this country for 26 years. The crowd, tight with silence, listened like it knew something was about to shift. I've worked beside law enforcement on every level. I've hunted cartel leaders, exposed corruption, negotiated with officials who could end careers with a single call. But last week, I was shoved, searched, and kicked to the ground by a uniformed officer who didn't ask who I was, because he thought he already knew. Her voice didn't set rise. She didn't set need it too. He saw a black woman in a car he didn't stet recognize. He made a choice, and what followed was not just an assault, it was a mirror. She paused, just long enough to let the crowd hold its breath. That deputy had 4 complaints before mine. Not one stuck. Why? Because his department protected him. Because Sheriff Calkins signed off on each dismissal. Because a system designed to police the public never learned how to police itself. There was a murmur in the crowd, angry, affirming. Camila met it with stillness. I filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice. I submitted internal documents, witness footage, suppressed memos, and funding records that show how deep this rot runs. This is no longer about one man Sip's boot. It's about the soil that grew him. Reporters scribbled. Someone in the back shouted, "Should the sheriff resign?" Camila didn't flinch. This isn't about resignation. It's about indictment. And with that, she stepped back from the podium. The crowd surged with questions, but she answered none. Her silence now wasn't restraint, it was power, because the reckoning wasn't in the speech, it was already in motion. That afternoon, a federal probe into Benton County Sheriff's Office was officially announced. Sheriff Linda Calkins was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Her statement to the press, citing concern and procedural review, landed like a wet match. Deputy Riker, still suspended, released a public denial through a local attorney, but it was too late. The body cam footage had leaked. The footage had sound. His voice, mocking, hostile, unapologetic, left no room for interpretation. "You kicked the wrong woman." The protest grew. Columbia, Jefferson City, Springfield. Not loud, not violent, just unignorable. People held signs with Camila's name, signs with one word. Back in the FBI field office, Camila sat in a glass-walled conference room, surrounded by data. Marcus stood by the window, scrolling through incoming memos. He looked up. "They start moving fast. DOJ task force is on the ground. Internal Affairs is reopening every case dismissed under Calkins." Camila nodded, eyes still scanning a flowchart of connected names. "And Grayson?" Marcus hesitated, still denying involvement. "But Sip got him linked to the funding shell that supported Riker Sip's tactical push." She folded her hands. "Then he goes on the board." One by one, names joined the chart, not out of vengeance, but justice. A system only crumbles if you name the beams holding it up. Late that night, Camila stood at the motel window, looking out at the glow of a parking lot light. It buzzed overhead, barely holding back the dark. In her hand was a flash drive. It held the last thread, a leaked warehouse recording. Calkins, Grayson, Riker. Talking strategy. Talking optics. Talking about her. She slipped it into a secure envelope. One destination. Not the press. The federal prosecutor she trusted most. By morning, warrants were being drawn. By noon, Linda Calkins was in custody. By sundown, Camila Brooks, bruised, limping but unbowed, walked out of the courthouse as headlines around the nation screamed the same word. Reckoning? And it had a name. By the time Camila stepped out of the courthouse's side exit, away from the cameras, away from the chants and headlines, the sun had begun to settle, casting long amber shadows across the pavement. She moved slowly, the adrenaline having worn off hours ago, replaced by the ache in her leg and a fatigue deeper than bone. The street was quiet here. Just a few parked cars, a faint hum of cicadas beyond the trees, and a breeze that stirred the hem of her coat like it was trying to whisper comfort. She stood still beside her SUV for a moment, her hand resting on the handle, eyes on the horizon. Somewhere far away, she imagined someone watching the same sun disappear, completely unaware of what had shifted today. Because something had shifted. Not in some explosive, world-rearranging way. No sweeping arrests broadcast live, no high-speed chases, no grand confessions, but in the quiet way that only truth can move, one line of testimony at a time, one document unsealed, one name finally spoken in daylight. And people were paying attention now. The video, the investigation, the arrests, They'd forced something into the open. Reporters who'd once glossed over these stories were digging now. Communities that had stopped hoping for accountability were marching again, not in chaos but in clarity. Camila climbed into the SUV with a wince and sat for a long time, without starting the engine. The interior was warm, the seat familiar. She let her head rest back, eyes closed, breath slow. Her phone vibrated in the console. She ignored it. Another call could wait. She didn't need more questions, or praise, or headlines. She needed stillness. But it didn't last. A knock tapped gently on her window. She opened her eyes, turned. A young woman, mid-20s, tense shoulders, wide eyes, stood there. Not press, not protester. Just someone local. Camila rolled down the window. "I didn't sorry," the woman said quickly. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just—" Camila waited. "I saw the video," the woman said. I've seen a lot of them, but this one, you stood up. You made them answer. I just wanted to say thank you for not staying quiet." Camila met her gaze. She didn't smile, but she nodded. Once, a gesture heavy with meaning. The woman backed away, murmured something close to be safe, and disappeared down the sidewalk. Camila watched her go. Watched her disappear into the world, changed in ways neither of them could yet name. That was the after. Not the viral clips, not the courtroom statements. The after was this: people watching, learning, carrying it forward, quietly, slowly, but with purpose. Camila turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed to life. The GPS blinked awake. But she didn't need directions. She knew the way forward. Because now the world had seen what it always tried to ignore. The headlines faded, as they always do. The protests thinned. The cameras moved on. The news cycle bent toward newer outrage, fresher scandal. But the echo remained. It lived in places you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking. A community center bulletin board in Columbia, Missouri, now pinned with flyers offering Know Your Rights workshops, hosted by volunteers who cited Camila's name as the reason they'd stepped forward. A high school civics teacher in St. Louis who paused his lesson on the Bill of Rights to play the cell phone video, not for shock value, but for context. "This is what power misused looks like," he said. "Now, let's talk about accountability." In a gas station a few counties over, the cashier kept a printed photo behind the counter. It wasn't Camila's face. It was a still frame of her standing back up, blood on her jeans, eyes steady. A reminder, she said, of what not backing down really looked like. That was the echo. Not noise. Resonance. Camila heard it too, subtle, scattered, sometimes barely audible beneath the daily churn of a life that had already resumed its shape. But every so often, it rang clear. Like in the email from a young black police cadet in Michigan, "I used to wonder if I could do this job without compromising who I am. Now I know I can. Because you did." Or the message from a mother in Georgia. "My daughter used to ask me why we didn't speak up. Now she asks how." These weren't statements. They were shifts. Little recalibrations in how people saw the world and themselves within it. Camila didn't chase the echo. She didn't need to. She simply kept working. Quietly. Steadily. She didn't return to her old office at the bureau. Not right away. Instead, she stayed mobile, tapped into networks, supported reform efforts in counties that reached out, consulted on misconduct policy restructuring. She'd become a presence that systems could no longer pretend was optional. Sometimes she spoke. Carefully chosen panels, closed-door summits. Not for applause, for impact. And always, with the weight of what started it all. 3 minutes. One deputy, one kick. A fire, lit by assumption, contained not by vengeance, but by truth. 1 year later, on a drive through Missouri, Camila found herself passing that same gas station. The lot had been repaved, new pumps installed. A fresh coat of paint brightened the roofline. It almost didn't look like the place where her body had hit the ground. But she parked anyway. She walked slow. At the far edge of the property, tucked beneath a modest tree, stood a plaque, bronze, weathered. It read, "Here, a woman did not fall." She rose. Camila stood before it, hands in her coat pockets, wind pulling gently at her collar. No one knew she was there. There were no cameras, no microphones, just her and the memory. And the sound of that still echo moving quietly through the trees. Change had come, not in thunderclaps, but in ripples. And the water was still moving.